The security officer's voice cut across the parade ground like a blade. "Sir, this area is restricted to family and invited guests only." The trucker in the worn flannel shirt did not move. His eyes stayed fixed on the stage where rows of white chairs awaited the ceremony, where a podium stood draped in red, white, and blue bunting, where in less than an hour his daughter would become a captain in the United States Army. What Captain Marcus Reinhardt did not know, what no one on that parade ground knew, was that in exactly 40 minutes, a colonel would fall to his knees and the entire ceremony would stop. Elias Vance had driven 1,400 miles without stopping for more than fuel and coffee. His rig sat in the civilian parking lot half a mile back, an 18-wheeler caked with the dust of 7 states, the cab still warm from the engine that had carried him through the night. He had not slept in 31 hours. He had not shaved in 4 days. His boots were scuffed down to the leather in places, held together by habit more than material, and his flannel shirt carried the permanent smell of diesel and distance. To anyone looking at him, he was exactly what he appeared to be, a road-worn trucker who had wandered somewhere he did not belong. Captain Reinhardt stepped closer, positioning himself between Elias and the seating area. The captain was young, maybe 34, with a pressed uniform and a face that suggested he had never been anywhere that uniform might get dirty. His voice carried the theatrical authority of a man who enjoyed an audience, and right now, several families arranging themselves in the white chairs had turned to watch. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Reinhardt said, loud enough for the nearest families to hear. "Do you have authorization to be in this area?" Elias turned his head slowly. His eyes, pale blue and webbed with the kind of lines that came from squinting into sun and sand and distances most men never traveled, met the captain's gaze without challenge. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, rough from disuse, respectful in a way that seemed automatic rather than calculated. "No, sir, I do not. I was hoping to stand in the back, sir. Watch the ceremony. I will not cause any trouble." Reinhardt's lip curled. "The back is for authorized personnel. This entire area is for families of the service members being promoted today." He gestured toward the parking lot with a dismissive sweep of his hand. "There is a public viewing area outside the main gate. You are welcome to watch from there." Something flickered across Elias's face, a tightening around the eyes that lasted less than a second. Then it was gone, replaced by the same weathered patience he had carried across 1,400 miles of highway. "Yes, sir," he said. "I understand, sir." He did not move. Reinhardt's jaw tightened. Around them, more families had noticed the confrontation. A woman in a blue dress whispered something to her husband. A young sergeant near the stage entrance had stopped arranging chairs and was watching with an expression that hovered somewhere between curiosity and concern. "Is there a problem here?" Reinhardt's voice dropped lower, losing its theatrical edge, taking on something harder. "Because if you do not remove yourself from this area in the next 30 seconds, I will have the MPs escort you off this base entirely. And I promise you, that will involve questions you do not want to answer." Elias looked past the captain toward the stage. The podium, the flags hanging still in the windless morning air. Somewhere behind that stage, in a building he could not see, his daughter was preparing, putting on her dress uniform, checking her ribbons, becoming the officer he always knew she would be. 8 years since he had seen her face in person. 8 years since he had held her. 8 years since he had left a note on the kitchen table and walked away from everything that mattered because he could not bear to look at her eyes and see her mother staring back at him. "Sir," Elias said, his voice still quiet, still respectful, carrying no trace of the 1,400 miles or the 31 hours or the 8 years. "I mean no disrespect. I just want to see the ceremony. I will stand wherever you tell me to stand. I will leave the moment it is over. I'm not here to cause problems." Reinhardt studied him for a long moment. The worn boots, the calloused hands, the way the man stood when he was addressed, shoulders back, spine straight, like someone had drilled posture into him decades ago, and his body had never forgotten. There was something about the trucker that did not quite fit the picture. Something in the economy of his movements, the stillness of his hands, the way his eyes tracked the perimeter of the parade ground without seeming to move at all. But Reinhardt had seen 100 drifters try to talk their way onto military bases. He had heard every excuse, every story, every sob tale designed to exploit the soft hearts of families gathered for celebrations. This man was no different, just older, more weathered, better at keeping his face blank. "I'm going to give you one chance," Reinhardt said. He stepped closer, close enough that only Elias could hear him. "Turn around. Walk back to your truck. Drive off this base. And do not come back, because if I see you here when the ceremony starts, I will personally ensure that you spend the rest of this day answering questions in a room with no windows. Do you understand me?" Elias met his eyes. For just a moment, something shifted in the trucker's bearing. Something cold, something precise, something that made Reinhardt take an involuntary half-step backward before he caught himself. Then it was gone, and Elias nodded once. "Yes, sir," he said. "I understand, sir." He turned and began walking toward the parking lot. His gait was unhurried, measured, the walk of a man who had learned long ago that haste attracted attention and attention attracted complications. In his pocket, his fingers touched the worn edge of a photograph. Two faces, his daughter at her commissioning, his wife beside her. The last photograph taken before the diagnosis, before the funeral, before the note on the kitchen table and the 1,400 miles of running that had somehow, impossibly, led him back here. He was halfway to the parking lot when he stopped. The American flag above the stage caught his eye. It hung still against the pale morning sky, but something about it, the colors, the way the fabric draped, triggered a memory he had spent 8 years trying to bury. A different flag, a different morning, a compound in a country that did not officially exist on any map, and a voice crackling through his earpiece. "Spectre, you're cleared hot." Spectre acknowledged. His hands trembled, just for a moment. Then they were still again. He turned around. Reinhardt was watching him from across the parade ground, arms crossed, jaw set. The young sergeant near the stage was still watching too, his expression now more curious than concerned. And beyond them both, families continued to arrive, filling the white chairs, arranging flowers and cameras and small American flags on sticks. Elias walked back toward the seating area, not toward the front, not toward Reinhardt, toward a small gap in the back row, near the edge of the parade ground, where a man in worn boots and a faded flannel shirt might stand without blocking anyone's view. Reinhardt saw him coming, his face flushed red, but before the captain could move, before he could shout or signal or summon the MPs he had threatened, Elias lowered himself into an empty seat at the end of the last row. He folded his hands in his lap. He fixed his eyes on the stage, and he waited. The young sergeant near the stage, the one who had been watching since the confrontation began, took a step closer. His name tape read Keen. His eyes moved from Elias to Reinhardt and back again. Then they dropped to the trucker's forearm, where a sleeve had ridden up just slightly in the morning heat. Sergeant Keen went very still. There was a tattoo on the old man's forearm, faded by sun and years, partially obscured by road grime and the kind of weathering that came from decades of work. But visible, coordinates, a date, and beneath them, something else, a symbol that Sergeant Keen had seen only once before in his life. On a wall, at Fort Bragg, in a hallway where legends were remembered. Reinhardt was moving now, cutting through the arriving families, his face tight with fury. In 30 seconds, he would reach the back row. In 30 seconds, he would make good on his threat. But Sergeant Keen was no longer watching Captain Reinhardt. He was staring at the trucker's arm, and his hands had begun to shake. 8 years ago, Elias Vance had stood in a cemetery and watched them lower his wife into the ground. The rain had fallen in sheets that day, soaking through his dress uniform, pooling in the brim of his beret, running down his face in streams that hid whatever tears he might have shed. Nadia had stood beside him, 23 years old, her mother's eyes red and swollen, her hand gripping his arm like she was afraid he might disappear. He had disappeared anyway. Not that day, not even that week. He had held it together through the funeral, through the reception at the house where Elena's friends brought casseroles and spoke in hushed voices about how brave she had been, how hard she had fought, how peaceful she had looked at the end. He had held it together through the paperwork and the phone calls and the slow dismantling of a life that had taken 30 years to build. But 3 weeks after they buried Elena, Elias had woken at 4 in the morning and looked at the ceiling of the bedroom they had shared for 26 years. The pillow beside him still smelled like her shampoo. The closet still held her dresses. The bathroom counter still had her toothbrush in the holder because neither he nor Nadia could bring themselves to throw it away. He had gotten out of bed. He had walked to the kitchen. He had written a note on the back of an envelope because he could not find paper and he could not bear to look for it. I love you. I am sorry. Live your life. Do not look for me. Then he had taken his truck keys from the hook by the door, climbed into the cab of the rig he had bought 6 months earlier for a cross-country hauling business he had never quite started, and driven away. He had not stopped driving since. Sitting in the back row of the parade ground, his hands folded in his lap, Elias could feel the weight of those 8 years pressing down on his shoulders like a physical thing. The families around him chatted and laughed and arranged their cameras. Children in Sunday clothes squirmed in their seats. Mothers dabbed at their eyes preemptively, already emotional at the thought of their sons and daughters receiving new ranks, new responsibilities, new steps on journeys that would carry them further from home. None of them knew that the man in the worn flannel shirt had once carried responsibilities that would have crushed most of them. None of them knew that the calloused hands folded so carefully in his lap had held weapons in places that did not exist on any official map. None of them knew that the trucker who smelled of diesel and distance had once been something else entirely, something that still lived in the coordinates tattooed on his forearm, in the dog tags hidden beneath his shirt, in the broken compass he carried in his pocket, its glass cracked, its needle frozen, its owner 22 years dead. Captain Reinhardt was pushing through the crowd now, his face flushed with anger, his eyes locked on Elias like a predator tracking wounded prey. Sergeant Keene had not moved from his position near the stage, but his attention was no longer on the confrontation unfolding across the parade ground. He was staring at his phone, scrolling through something with fingers that trembled slightly. Elias did not notice either of them. He was looking at the photograph he had pulled from his pocket. The edges were soft from years of handling. The colors had faded from too many hours in sunlight streaming through truck windows. But the faces were still clear. Elena, her smile bright despite the shadows already forming beneath her eyes. Nadia, young and proud in her brand-new second lieutenant's uniform, the gold bars gleaming on her shoulders. They had taken the photograph the day of Nadia's commissioning, 6 months before the diagnosis, 8 months before the end, a lifetime ago, when Elias still believed that the hardest parts of his life were behind him. He had been wrong. The hardest part had been driving away. The hardest part had been waking up in truck stop parking lots and rest areas and the cabs of loading docks, reaching for a pillow that was not there, listening for a voice that would never speak again. The hardest part had been tracking Nadia from a distance, using truck stop Wi-Fi to check her social media, reading articles about her promotions and assignments and deployments, watching her become the officer her mother always knew she would be. The hardest part had been loving her too much to face her, because every time Elias looked at his daughter, he saw Elena. The same dark hair, the same fierce intelligence in her eyes, the same stubborn set to her jaw when she had made up her mind about something. Looking at Nadia was like looking at a ghost, and Elias had already spent too many years being haunted. So he had run, not from weakness, from something worse, from the certainty that his presence would only remind her of what she had lost, from the belief, bone deep and unshakable, that a man who had failed to protect his wife did not deserve to watch his daughter succeed. He had told himself it was for her own good. He had told himself she was better off without a father who woke up screaming from nightmares about things he could never tell her. He had told himself that the note was enough, that I love you is enough, that she would understand. But sitting here now, watching the stage where she would stand in less than an hour, Elias knew the truth. He had been coward. The word sat heavy in his chest, heavier than the medals he had earned, heavier than the flag they had draped over the coffins of friends he had carried home. He had faced enemy fire without flinching. He had walked into ambushes knowing he might not walk out. He had held his best friend in his arms as the life bled out of him and still found the strength to call on the coordinates, to direct the extraction, to complete the mission. But he had not been able to look his daughter in the eye and say, "I'm broken and I need help." Reinhardt was 10 feet away now. His hand was reaching for the radio on his belt. His mouth was forming words that Elias could not hear over the ringing in his ears. "Elena," he whispered, so quiet that no one around him could hear. "I'm trying. I know it is not enough, but I am trying." He touched the photograph one more time. Then he slid it back in his pocket, next to the broken compass, next to the dog tags of a dead friend, next to all the other fragments of a life he had spent 8 years trying to outrun. On the stage, a door opened. Officers in dress uniforms began filing out, taking their positions for the ceremony. Somewhere among them, invisible from this angle, his daughter was preparing to become a captain. Elias straightened in his seat, his shoulders squared, his spine aligned with the precision of 31 years of muscle memory. For just a moment, the trucker in the worn flannel shirt disappeared, and something else took his place. Something harder, something older, something forged in fires that most of the families around him could not imagine. Then Reinhardt's hand closed on his shoulder. "Stand up," the captain hissed. "You are coming with me. Right now." Elias looked up at him. His face was calm. His voice, when he spoke, carried no anger, no defiance, only a quiet resolve that made Reinhardt's grip falter for just a moment. "Sir," Elias said, "I have not seen my daughter in 8 years. I drove 1,400 miles to watch her become a captain. I'm not going to cause trouble. I'm not going to make a scene. But I am not leaving until I see her receive what she has earned." Reinhardt's eyes narrowed. "Your daughter?" "Yes, sir." "You expect me to believe that one of the officers being promoted today is the daughter of a man who looks like he has been living out of a truck for the last decade?" Elias held his gaze. "I do not expect you to believe anything, sir. I'm just telling you the truth." For a long moment, neither man moved. The families around them had fallen silent, watching the confrontation with a mixture of discomfort and curiosity. Sergeant Keene was walking toward them now, his phone still clutched in his hand, his face pale. Then Reinhardt smiled. It was not a kind smile. "Fine," he said. "We will see about that." He keyed his radio. "This is Captain Reinhardt. I need a records check on all family members listed for today's promotion ceremony. Cross-reference with civilian databases. I want to know if anyone named on those lists has a father who matches the description of a white male, approximately 60 years old, currently seated in the back row of Section C." He released the radio and looked down at Elias. "If you are lying," he said, "you're going to wish you had walked away when I gave you the chance." Elias said nothing. He just looked past Reinhardt toward the stage, where the ceremony was about to begin, and waited for his daughter to appear. Sergeant Keene reached them before Reinhardt's radio crackled with a response. His face had lost most of its color, and his eyes kept darting between the captain and the old man in the back row like he was watching a collision unfold in slow motion and could not decide which vehicle to warn. "Captain Reinhardt," he said. "Sir, I need to speak with you." Reinhardt did not turn around. His hand was still on Elias's shoulder, his grip tightening as if he expected the trucker to bolt at any moment. "Not now, Sergeant. I am dealing with a situation." Sir Keene pressed, his voice dropping lower. "This is important. It concerns the situation you are dealing with." Something in the sergeant's tone made Reinhardt pause. He glanced back, taking in Keene's pale face, the phone clutched in his hand, the way his eyes kept sliding toward the old man's forearm, where the sleeve had ridden up to expose the edge of a faded tattoo. "What is it?" Reinhardt said. "Make it quick." Keene stepped closer, positioning himself so that his back was to the families in the surrounding seats. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Sir, I need you to look at something." He held up his phone, the screen angled so only Reinhardt could see. "I searched the coordinates on his tattoo, the ones on his forearm." Reinhardt's eyes flicked to the phone. His brow furrowed. "So what? They are probably coordinates to some truck stop where he spent a memorable night." "No, sir." Keene swallowed hard. "They are coordinates to a compound in eastern Afghanistan, a compound that was the site of a classified operation in 2003, an operation that officially does not exist." Reinhardt stared at him. What are you talking about? Keene glanced at Elias, who had not moved, whose eyes remained fixed on the stage where officers were still filing into position. Sir, I did 2 tours with the 75th Ranger Regiment. I know what unit markings look like. The symbol on his arm, beneath the coordinates, it is not something you buy at a surplus store. It is not something you get tattooed because you think it looks impressive. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. It is a unit crest, sir. Delta Force. And if those coordinates mean what I think they mean, then the man you have been threatening for the last 20 minutes is someone whose name is spoken with reverence in places you and I will never see. Reinhardt's hand slowly released Elias's shoulder. He looked down at the trucker, at the worn flannel and the scuffed boots, and the weathered face that had shown nothing but quiet patience through every insult and every threat. Then he looked back at Keene. You're telling me this vagrant is Delta Force. I'm telling you, sir, that we need to be very careful about what happens next. Reinhardt's jaw tightened. He was not a man who responded well to being told to be careful. He had built his career on decisive action, on maintaining order, on ensuring that every ceremony under his watch proceeded with flawless precision. A trucker who had wandered onto the parade ground and refused to leave was a problem. Problems were solved by removing them. That was how it worked. That was how it had always worked. He turned back to Elias. His voice, when he spoke, had lost some of its theatrical edge, but had not lost its contempt. Sergeant Keene seems to think you might be someone important, he said. He thinks the tattoo on your arm means something. He studied Elias's face, searching for a reaction. So why do you not tell me? Who are you really? What unit did you serve with? What is your rank? Elias was silent for a long moment. Around them, the parade ground hummed with the energy of families settling into their seats, children being shushed, cameras being tested. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning off the last of the haze, casting sharp shadows across the white chairs and the bunting-draped stage. When Elias finally spoke, his voice was soft, tired, carrying the weight of years. I served a long time ago, sir, in places that do not matter anymore, with men who are mostly dead now. He turned his head slightly, meeting Reinhardt's eyes for the first time since the captain had grabbed his shoulder. I am not here to cause trouble. I am not here to impress anyone. I am just a father who wants to see his daughter. Reinhardt leaned closer. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have, sir. The radio on Reinhardt's belt crackled. Captain Reinhardt, this is base security. We have completed the records check you requested. There is one match for the description you provided. A civilian father listed on the family notification form for Captain Select Nadia Vance. Name is Elias Vance. No current address on file. No contact information. The form notes that the service member has had no contact with her father in approximately 8 years, but requested he be listed in case of emergency notification. Reinhardt stared at the radio like it had betrayed him. Sergeant Keene let out a slow breath. Sir, he said quietly, I think we should let him stay. The captain did not respond. His eyes moved from the radio to Elias to the stage where the ceremony was about to begin. The families around them had stopped pretending not to watch. A woman in the row ahead had her phone out, the camera app open, recording everything. Reinhardt's career flashed before his eyes. The incident reports. The questions from his commanding officer. The viral video of a protocol officer harassing a veteran father at his own daughter's promotion ceremony. He could see it all unfolding, could see the dominoes falling one by one toward consequences he could not control. But deeper than the fear, deeper than the calculation, was something else. A stubbornness that had served him well in some situations and poorly in others. A refusal to back down once he had committed to a course of action. He straightened his uniform. He adjusted his cap. And when he spoke, his voice carried the cold precision of a man who had decided to double down. Records check confirms you have a daughter being promoted today, he said. Fine. You can stay for the ceremony. But the moment it is over, you and I are going to have a conversation about proper procedures for accessing military installations. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only Elias could hear. And I'm going to find out exactly who you are. because I do not believe for 1 second that a man who looks like you belongs anywhere near this parade ground." He turned and walked away, shouldering past Sergeant Keene without a glance. Keene stood frozen for a moment, watching the captains retreating back. Then he turned to Elias. His voice was soft, respectful in a way that Reinhardt's had never been. "Sir," he said, "I apologize for the captain's behavior. He does not know what he is dealing with." Elias looked at him. The younger man's face was earnest, his eyes carrying the particular intensity of someone who had served and understood what service meant. On his chest, beneath the name tape, Keene wore the Ranger tab that marked him as one of the Army's elite. "You were with the 75th, Elias said. It was not a question. Keene nodded. "2 tours, Kandahar and Helmand." He hesitated, then added, "I have seen photographs, sir, on the walls at Bragg. I know what that unit crest means. I know what those coordinates probably represent." Elias was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and placed a hand briefly on Keene's shoulder, a gesture that carried more weight than words. "Thank you for your service, Sergeant." Keene swallowed. "Sir, I should be saying that to you." Elias shook his head. "Just find me a spot where I can see the stage without causing any more trouble. That is all I need." Keene nodded. He gestured toward a gap at the end of the back row, partially shielded from view by a large speaker stand. "You can see everything from there, sir, and you will be out of the captain's line of sight." Elias moved to the spot Keene had indicated. He lowered himself into the chair, folded his hands in his lap, and fixed his eyes on the stage where his daughter would soon appear. Behind him, the ceremony preparations continued. Officers took their positions. The color guard assembled near the entrance. A bugle player tested his instrument with a few soft notes that drifted across the parade ground like memories. And on the stage, Colonel Theodore Ashby stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and prepared to begin. The broken compass in Elias's pocket had not worked in 22 years. Its glass was cracked from the impact that had killed the man who carried it. Its needle was frozen, pointing forever toward a direction that no longer mattered. But Elias carried it anyway, the same way he carried the memory of the man who had given it to him, the same way he carried the weight of a promise he had failed to keep. Raymond Coulter, call sign Hound, point man, best friend, godfather to a little girl named Nadia who used to call him Uncle Ray and beg him to push her on the swings when he came to visit. Elias's fingers found the compass through the fabric of his pocket as Colonel Ashby welcomed the families to the ceremony. The metal was warm from his body heat, smooth from decades of handling. He did not need to look at it to know every scratch, every dent, every imperfection in the casing. He had memorized them all in the dark hours between midnight and dawn, lying in the cab of his truck, talking to a dead man who could not answer. 22 years ago, they had gone into a compound in eastern Afghanistan. Operation Crimson Veil. A mission so classified that the men who planned it used code names even when speaking to each other. The objective was simple: extract a CIA asset who had embedded himself with a Taliban cell and obtain intelligence that could prevent attacks on 3 American bases. Get in, get the asset, get out. 45 minutes from insertion to extraction. It had taken 11 hours. The asset was already dead when they arrived. The intelligence had been compromised, and the 12-man team that fast-roped into that compound found themselves surrounded by a force 3 times their size, cut off from extraction, fighting for every breath in a maze of mud walls and narrow alleys that turned into a killing ground. Elias had been the team's senior sniper. Hound had been his spotter, his partner, the man who watched his back while he watched everyone else's. They had worked together for 6 years by then, through 4 deployments, through more missions than Elias could count. They had saved each other's lives so many times that the debt had become meaningless. They were brothers in every way that mattered. The ambush came in hour 3. They had cleared a building twice, checked every corner, every room, every shadow where a threat might hide. Hound had called it clear. Elias had trusted him, the way he always trusted him, the way you trust the man who has pulled you out of more firefights than you can remember. The shooter had been hiding in a space beneath the floorboards, a space so small that no one had thought to check it. He came up firing the moment Hound's back was turned. Elias killed him half a second too late. The rounds caught Hound in the side, just below his vest, where the ceramic plates did not reach. Elias saw his friend fall, saw the blood spreading across the dirt floor, saw the light already fading from eyes that had watched his back for 6 years. He had dragged Hound into cover, had pressed his hands against the wounds, had screamed into his radio for a medic who was pinned down 3 buildings away and could not move. And Hound had looked up at him with those fading eyes and said the words that had haunted Elias every day since. Not your fault, Spectre. Never your fault. Get home to them. That is an order. Then he had pressed something into Elias's bloody hand. The compass. His lucky charm. The one he had carried through every mission since he earned his scroll. It had taken Hound 90 seconds to die. 90 seconds of Elias holding him, talking to him, promising him that he would make it, that extraction was coming, that they would get him home. 90 seconds of lying to a dying man. Elias had carried the compass ever since. Through the rest of that mission. Through the 8 more hours of fighting before extraction finally came. Through the flight home with Hound's body in a bag beside him. Through the funeral where he had to look Hound's sister in the eye and tell her that her brother had died a hero. He had not told her the truth. He had not told her that Hound died because Elias missed a shot, because somewhere in those 11 hours his focus had slipped, because he had been thinking about Elena and Nadia waiting at home instead of the crosshairs in front of him. Hound had told him to get home to them. And for 15 years after that night, Elias had tried. He had finished his career. He had retired with full honors. He had come home to Elena and Nadia and tried to be the husband and father they deserved. But the compass in his pocket never let him forget. And when Elena died, when the last anchor holding him to the world was cut loose, the weight of that memory had finally pulled him under. On the stage, Colonel Ashby was speaking about duty and sacrifice and the meaning of service. His words washed over Elias like water over stone, present but not penetrating. The families around him listened with rapt attention, some dabbing at their eyes, some nodding along with solemn pride. Elias heard none of it. He was back in that compound, back in that room with the dirt floor and the blood spreading and the light fading from his best friend's eyes. Back in the moment when everything he thought he knew about himself shattered into pieces he had never been able to put back together. Still here, Hound, he whispered, so soft that no one around him could hear. Still trying. His fingers tightened around the compass in his pocket. The mission had earned him a Distinguished Service Cross. The citation spoke of extraordinary heroism, of single-handedly holding a position for 6 hours while wounded, of carrying 2 injured teammates to the extraction point under fire. It did not mention a man he had failed to save. It did not mention the 90 seconds that had broken something inside him that no metal could fix. After Crimson Veil, Elias had requested reassignment to training duty. He had spent his last 8 years of service teaching young operators the skills that might keep them alive, try to ensure that none of them would ever have to carry what he carried, know what he knew, live with what he lived with. It had not been enough. Nothing had been enough. And now, 22 years later, he sat in the back row of a parade ground watching his daughter prepare to become a captain, and he still could not escape the weight of a broken compass and a dying man's last words. Get home to them. That is an order. Elias closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the stage had filled with officers in dress uniforms, their ranks gleaming in the morning sun. Colonel Ashby was calling the first name on the promotion list. Somewhere in that line of officers, hidden from his view by the angle of the stage, his daughter was waiting. And in his pocket, against his thigh, the broken compass pointed toward a direction that no longer existed, carrying the memory of a man who had believed, until his last breath, that Elias Vance was worth saving. The ceremony moved with the precise rhythm of military tradition. Each name called, each officer stepping forward, each set of new rank insignia pinned to collars by proud family members who had been escorted to the stage for the honor. Colonel Ashby presided over it all with the practiced ease of a man who had performed this ritual dozens of times, his voice carrying across the parade ground with warmth and gravity in equal measure. Elias watched from his position in the back row, partially hidden by the speaker stand, his eyes tracking every movement on the stage. 3 officers had been promoted so far. 2 first lieutenants becoming captains. 1 captain becoming a major. Each time, families rose from their seats and made their way to the stage. Cameras flashing, tears flowing, embraces exchanged beneath the flags that hung motionless in the still morning air. Each time, Elias felt the distance between himself and that stage like a physical wound. He had no right to be up there. No right to pin his daughter's new rank on her collar. No right to embrace her in front of all these families who had not abandoned their children for 8 years. He had forfeited that right the night he drove away from everything that mattered. The best he could hope for now was to see her from a distance, to watch her receive what she had earned, to carry that memory with him back to the highway, back to the truck stops and loading docks and endless miles of road that had become his penance. Captain Reinhardt had positioned himself near the front of the seating area, his back to the families, his eyes scanning the crowd with the vigilance of a man who expected trouble. Every few minutes, his gaze would sweep toward the back row, toward the spot where Elias sat motionless, and his jaw would tighten with barely contained frustration. Sergeant Keene had taken a position near the stage entrance, ostensibly to assist with the ceremony logistics, but his attention kept drifting toward the old man in the worn flannel shirt. There was something in his expression that went beyond curiosity, something that looked almost like reverence. The 4th name was called. A young lieutenant stepped forward, her family rising from seats near the front, and the ritual began again. Elias's chest tightened. Nadia would be next. He could feel it in his bones, the way he used to feel the approach of contact before the first shot was fired. His daughter was somewhere behind that stage, preparing to walk out into the sunlight, preparing to become a captain in the United States Army. And he would watch from the back row like a stranger. The pinning ceremony for the 4th officer concluded. The family returned to their seats. Colonel Ashby consulted his notes, and when he looked up again, there was something different in his expression, a slight softening around the eyes, a hint of personal investment that had not been there for the previous names. "It is my particular honor," he said, "to call forward our next officer for promotion. Captain-Select Nadia Vance has distinguished herself in Army intelligence with exceptional service across 3 deployments. Her work in signals analysis has directly contributed to the success of multiple joint operations, and her leadership has earned the respect of everyone who has served alongside her." Elias stopped breathing. "Captain-Select Vance," Colonel Ashby continued, "please step forward." She emerged from the side of the stage, and the world around Elias dissolved. 8 years. 8 years since he had seen her in person, and yet she looked exactly as he remembered. No, not exactly. She was older now, 31 years old, her face carrying the particular maturity that came from command responsibility, from deployments to places where the wrong decision could cost lives. But she had Elena's eyes, Elena's dark hair, pulled back in a regulation bun. Elena's way of holding herself, straight-backed and certain, like she knew exactly who she was and what she was capable of. Looking at her was like looking at a ghost and a miracle at the same time. Nadia walked to the center of the stage and executed a perfect about-face, her eyes forward, her bearing immaculate. Colonel Ashby smiled at her with what looked like genuine affection. "Captain-Select Vance," he said, "do you have a family member present who will do the honor of pinning your new rank?" Nadia's composure flickered, just for a moment, a shadow crossing her face so quickly that anyone who did not know her might have missed it entirely. "No, sir," she said. Her voice was steady, but Elias heard the crack beneath it, the hairline fracture that 8 years of absence had carved into her heart. "I will be honored to have you perform the pinning, Colonel." Ashby nodded, his expression softening further. "The honor is mine, Captain." He reached for the box containing her new rank insignia. And in the back row, hidden behind a speaker stand, Elias Vance felt something break inside his chest. She had listed him on her emergency notification form. After 8 years of silence, after a note that told her not to look for him, she had still listed him as her father. She had still hoped he might come. And now she stood on that stage, alone, receiving the recognition she had earned without a single family member to share it with her. Because he had been too afraid to walk up to that stage, too convinced that he did not deserve to stand beside her, too broken to believe that his presence might matter more than his absence. Hound's voice echoed in his memory. "Get home to them. That is an order." Elias's hands gripped the edges of his seat. His knuckles went white. Every instinct he had developed over 31 years of service screamed at him to stay put, to remain concealed, to complete the mission he had assigned himself, and then disappear back into the anonymity of the highway. But another voice, older and quieter, whispered something different. She needed him. His daughter was standing on that stage, surrounded by families who had come to celebrate, and she was alone. She had done everything right. She had built a career. She had earned her promotions. She had become the officer her mother always knew she would be. And she was receiving the greatest professional recognition of her life without a single person who loved her standing by her side. Because he had driven away 8 years ago and never looked back. Colonel Ashby opened the box containing Nadia's captain bars. The gold insignia caught the morning light, gleaming against the dark velvet interior. He reached toward her collar to remove her first lieutenant rank. Elias stood up. The movement drew eyes from the families seated around him. Sergeant Keene's head snapped toward him. Captain Reinhardt, near the front, turned with narrowed eyes and a hand already moving toward his radio. But Elias did not see any of them. He saw only his daughter standing alone on that stage, and the empty space beside her where a father should have been. He took a step forward, then another, and somewhere in the crowd, a woman with a phone raised it higher, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. Elias moved through the seated families like a man walking through a dream. His boots, scuffed and worn, made no sound on the grass. His eyes never left the stage where his daughter stood, waiting for a stranger to pin her rank. Around him, heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. The trucker from the back row was walking toward the stage, and no one knew why. Captain Reinhardt intercepted him before he had covered half the distance. The captain stepped directly into Elias's path, his hand raised, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and vindication. "I warned you," he said, loud enough for the surrounding families to hear. "I gave you every opportunity to leave quietly. Now you're going to be escorted off this base in handcuffs." Elias stopped. His eyes, pale blue and steady, met Reinhardt's without flinching. But he did not speak. He did not need to. Something in his bearing had shifted during that walk from the back row. The trucker who had accepted insults with quiet patience was gone. In his place stood something else. Something harder. Something that made Reinhardt's next words die in his throat. On the stage, Colonel Ashby had paused with Nadia's captain bars in his hand. He was watching the confrontation unfolding in the middle of his ceremony, his brow furrowed, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. Nadia was watching too. Her eyes had found the commotion, had tracked the worn flannel shirt and the weathered face, and something in her expression had frozen. Her lips parted slightly. Her hands, clasped behind her back in perfect military posture, began to tremble. Reinhardt recovered his composure. He reached for Elias's arm, the same grab he had attempted twice before. "You are coming with me. Right now. I do not care who you think you are or what story you have concocted. This ceremony will not be disrupted by some vagrant who cannot follow simple instructions." His hand closed around Elias's forearm, and the sleeve rode up. The tattoo was fully visible now, exposed by the angle of Reinhardt's grip. The coordinates stood out in faded black ink against sun-weathered skin. 34.5253 degrees north, 69.1725 degrees east. Beneath them, a date. August 14th, 2003. And beneath that, the unit crest that Sergeant Keene had recognized from photographs on the walls of Fort Bragg. The arrowhead and dagger of Delta Force, rendered in precise detail by a hand that understood what those symbols meant. But it was not the unit crest that made Reinhardt's grip falter. It was the names. 2 names, inked in smaller letters beneath the military markings. Hound, and below it, in slightly newer ink, Elena. Reinhardt stared at the tattoo. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He had expected to find con artist, a drifter with a stolen story. What he was looking at did not fit any category he understood. Sergeant Keene had pushed through the crowd and now stood a few feet away, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the exposed forearm. "Sir," he said, his voice cracking. "Captain Reinhardt, sir, you need to let him go." Reinhardt did not move. His hand remained locked around Elias's arm, his knuckles white, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. On the stage, Colonel Ashby set down the captain bars. He took a step toward the edge of the platform, his eyes narrowing as he studied the confrontation below. Something about the old man in the worn flannel had caught his attention. Something about the way he stood, the way he held himself, even with another man's hand clamped around his arm. Ashby had seen men stand like that before, a long time ago, in places that did not exist on any official record. "What is happening here?" he called out, his voice carrying the authority of 30 years of command. "Captain Reinhardt, explain yourself." Reinhardt finally released Elias's arm. He stepped back, straightening his uniform, trying to regain the composure that had cracked the moment he saw those names inked into weathered skin. "Sir," he said, "this civilian was attempting to disrupt the ceremony. I was removing him from the premises as per security protocol." Ashby's eyes moved from Reinhardt to Elias. They lingered on the trucker's face, on his posture, on the forearm where the tattoo was still visible, the sleeve bunched up around the elbow. And Colonel Theodore Ashby went very still. 23 years fell away in an instant. He was a young lieutenant again, pinned down in a compound that had become a killing ground, watching his men die one by one, certain that extraction would never come. He was pressing a bandage against the wound in his sergeant's chest, feeling the blood seep through his fingers, praying to a God he was not sure he believed in. And then a shadow had appeared in the doorway. A single operator, moving with the fluid precision of a predator, his rifle already firing before his boots touched the ground. In 11 minutes, 14 hostiles were dead. In 11 minutes, the tide of a battle that had seemed lost was turned completely. Ashby had asked the man his name. The operator had said it did not matter. But Ashby had seen his face, had memorized every line, every scar, every detail that might help him identify his savior if they ever crossed paths again. He had never forgotten. And now, 23 years later, that same face was staring up at him from the middle of a promotion ceremony. Older, whether by time and grief and years of hard road, but unmistakable. Ashby's hand gripped the edge of the podium. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. But in the sudden silence that had fallen over the parade ground, everyone heard it. "Spectre." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Reinhardt's face drained of color. Sergeant Keene's hand came up to cover his mouth. The families in the surrounding seats exchanged confused glances, not understanding what they were witnessing, but sensing that something profound had just shifted. And on the stage, still frozen in place, Nadia Vance stared at the old man in the worn flannel shirt. The man she had not seen in 8 years. The man who had left a note on the kitchen table and vanished into the night. The man whose absence had carved a hole in her heart that no amount of professional success could fill. Her father. Colonel Ashby descended the stairs from the stage. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a man approaching something sacred. The crowd parted before him without being asked, sensing that this moment belonged to forces beyond their understanding. He stopped in front of Elias. The two men stood face to face, separated by 23 years and a debt that could never be repaid. Ashby's voice was rough with emotion. "I'll look for you. After that night, I tried to find out who you were. They told me the operation never happened. They told me the men who saved us did not exist." Elias met his eyes. "We were not supposed to exist, sir. That was the point." Ashby shook his head slowly. "You saved 32 men that night. You carried my sergeant 3 miles to extraction with a bullet in your own shoulder." He paused, his jaw tightening against the swell of emotion. "I have thought about you every day for 23 years, wondering who you were, wondering if I would ever get the chance to say thank you." Elias was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice soft. I was just doing my job, sir. No. Ashby's voice cracked. You were doing something far beyond any job. And I need you to know that the man you carried that night, my sergeant, he made it home. He has 4 grandchildren now. He is alive because of you. Elias closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. Behind them, the parade ground had fallen completely silent. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. Every eye was fixed on the 2 men standing in the middle of the ceremony, bound together by a night that officially never happened. And on the stage, forgotten for the moment, Nadia Vance took a single step forward. Her voice, when it finally came, was the voice of a little girl who had lost her father and never stopped searching. The word cut through the silence like a blade through cloth. 1 syllable, 3 letters. A question and a prayer wrapped into a single broken sound that carried more weight than any of the speeches or citations or formal military phrases that had filled the parade ground that morning. Dad! Elias turned toward the stage. His daughter stood at the edge of the platform, her composure shattered, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. She looked like Elena in that moment. Exactly like Elena. The same expression her mother had worn the day Elias came home from his last deployment, standing in the doorway of their house, unable to believe he was really there until she touched his face with trembling fingers. Nadia, he whispered. Her name felt foreign on his tongue after 8 years of speaking it only in the dark, only in the cab of his truck, only when there was no one around to hear. She took another step forward, then another. Her dress uniform, immaculate moments before, seemed suddenly irrelevant. The captain bars waiting to be pinned to her collar were forgotten. Everything she had worked for, everything she had achieved in the years since he left, dissolved into a single, overwhelming need. To reach him, Elias could not move. His boots had rooted themselves to the grass of the parade ground, anchored by guilt and grief and the terrible certainty that he did not deserve this moment. He had driven away. He had left a note. He had abandoned her when she needed him most, and now she was walking toward him like he had any right to be part of her life. She reached the stairs at the edge of the stage. Her foot found the first step, the second, and then she stopped. Something crossed her face, a shadow of the pain he had caused her. 8 years of birthdays without a father. 8 years of deployments without anyone to call when she was scared. 8 years of promotions and achievements and milestones with an empty chair where he should have been sitting. She had searched for him. He knew that now. She had listed him on her emergency notification form. She had never stopped hoping he might come back. But hoping and having were 2 different things, and the man standing in front of her was not the father she remembered. He was older, thinner, worn down by years of running from everything he could not face. Why, she said. The word came out cracked, broken at the edges. Why did you leave? Elias opened his mouth to answer, but the words would not come. How could he explain? How could he tell her that looking at her face was like looking at her mother's ghost? How could he describe the weight of a broken compass in his pocket, the voices of dead friends in his dreams, the crushing certainty that he was too damaged to be anything but a burden? I am sorry, he said. The words were inadequate. He knew they were inadequate, but they were all he had. Nadia, I am so sorry. She stood frozen on the stairs, her hands gripping the railing, her knuckles white. The parade ground around them had ceased to exist. The families, the officers, Colonel Ashby standing a few feet away, with tears streaming down his weathered face. None of it mattered. There was only a father and a daughter, separated by 10 feet of grass and 8 years of silence. You left a note, Nadia said. Her voice was stronger now, hardened by the same steel that had carried her through 3 deployments and a career in Army intelligence. You left a note telling me not to look for you, like I was supposed to just forget you existed, like losing Mom was not enough. Elias flinched. The words hit him harder than any bullet ever had. I cannot face you, he said. His voice broke on the last word. After your mother died, I looked at you, and all I could see was her. Every time, every single time. And I cannot bear it, Nadia. I cannot bear being reminded of what I had lost. So you left. Her jaw tightened. You decided that running away was easier than staying. Easier than helping me bury my mother. Easier than being my father. The accusation hung in the air between them. True. Every word of it true. Elias had no defense. No excuse. He had failed her in the worst possible way, and no amount of classified operations or distinguished service crosses could change that. "You are right," he said. He took a step toward the stairs. Then another. His voice was barely above a whisper, but in the absolute silence of the parade ground, it carried to every ear. "I was a coward, Nadia. I spent 31 years in places where cowardice meant death. And then I came home, and I was the biggest coward of all. I ran from my own daughter because I was too broken to face her." Nadia's grip on the railing loosened. Her expression shifted. The anger was still there, but something else was rising beneath it. Something that looked like the hope she had carried for 8 years, battered but unbroken. "Uncle Ray's compass," she said suddenly. The words seemed to surprise even her. "Do you still have it?" Elias's hand moved to his pocket without conscious thought. His fingers found a familiar shape through the worn fabric. The cracked glass, the frozen needle, the memory of a dying man pressing it into his bloody palm. "Every day," he said. "I have carried it every day since he died." Nadia came down the last 2 stairs. She crossed the grass between them with quick, determined strides. And then she was standing in front of him, close enough to touch, close enough that he could see the tears streaming down her face. "Mom used to tell me stories," she said, "about Uncle Ray, about the things you did together, about the men you saved." She wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. "She said you carried so much weight that sometimes she was afraid it would crush you. She said the only thing that kept you going was us. Me and her." Elias could not speak. His throat had closed around a grief so vast that words could not contain it. "She was right," Nadia continued. "Was she not? We were the only thing keeping you together. And when she died, you fell apart." Elias nodded. A single motion. An admission of everything he had tried to outrun for 8 years. Nadia reached out. Her hand found his. The touch was tentative at first, uncertain, like she was afraid he might disappear again if she held on too tightly. Then her fingers tightened, and she pulled his hand toward her, and she pressed it against her cheek the way she used to do when she was a little girl. When he would come home from deployments, and she would grab his hand and hold it against her face just to prove he was real. "I needed you," she said. Her voice broke completely. "I needed my father, and you were gone." "I know," Elias whispered. "I know." They stood like that for a long moment, father and daughter, connected by touch for the first time in 8 years. Around them, the parade ground remained frozen. Families watched with tears in their eyes. Officers stood at attention without being ordered. Colonel Ashby had removed his cap and was holding it against his chest. And Captain Reinhardt, standing alone near the front row, stared at the scene with an expression that had shifted from contempt to something that might have been the first stirrings of shame. Nadia pulled back slightly. She looked up at her father's face, studying the lines that 8 years of hard road had carved into his features. "I have spent 8 years looking for you," she said. "I hired private investigators. I searched every veteran database I could access. I never stopped looking. Not once." Elias closed his eyes against the fresh wave of pain. "Why?" he asked. "After what I did, why did you keep looking?" Nadia's answer was simple, immediate, carrying the weight of a truth she had never doubted. "Because you are my father, and I was not going to leave you behind." Colonel Ashby stepped forward. His boots made soft sounds on the grass as he approached the father and daughter, standing frozen in their private moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the gentle authority of a man who understood that some things mattered more than ceremony. "Captain-Select Vance," he said. Nadia turned to look at him, her hand still gripping her father's. "I believe we have a promotion to complete, and I believe there is someone here who should be doing the pinning." Nadia's breath caught. She looked at Elias, her eyes asking a question she could not put into words. Elias shook his head slowly. "I cannot. I do not deserve to stand up there with you. Not after everything I have done." Colonel Ashby moved closer. His voice dropped so that only Elias and Nadia could hear. "Command Sergeant Major Vance," he said, and Elias flinched at the use of his rank, the rank he had not heard spoken aloud in years. I spent 23 years believing I would never get the chance to repay the debt I owe you. 23 years wondering if the man who saved my platoon was even still alive. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. You have spent 8 years punishing yourself for sins that exist only in your own mind. Do you not think that is long enough? Elias looked at him. The colonel's face was weathered by decades of service, lined by command decisions that had cost lives and saved them in equal measure. There was no judgment in his eyes, only understanding, only the particular compassion of a man who had carried his own burdens through the long years. Your daughter needs you, Ashby continued. Not the legend, not the operator, just her father, standing beside her while she receives the recognition she has earned. He gestured toward the stage. That is not a privilege, Sergeant Major. It is a duty, and you have never walked away from duty in your life. The words landed like precision strikes, each one finding its target, each one dismantling another piece of the wall Elias had built between himself and everything he had lost. Nadia squeezed his hand. Dad, she said, please. One word, one syllable. But it carried the weight of 8 years of absence, 8 years of searching, 8 years of hoping against hope that he would come back to her. Elias looked at his daughter, at the captain's bars waiting on the stage, at the families who had fallen silent around them, witnesses to a moment that had transcended ceremony and become something else entirely. He thought of Elena, of the promise he had made to her on their wedding day, to protect and cherish their family above all else, of the way she had looked at him the last time she was conscious, her hand in his, her voice barely a whisper. Take care of her, Eli. Take care of our girl. He had failed that promise. For 8 years, he had failed it completely. But standing here now, with his daughter's hand in his and a colonel offering him a chance at redemption, Elias understood something he had been running from since the night he drove away. It was not too late. He straightened, his shoulders squared, his spine aligned with the muscle memory of 31 years of service. And when he spoke, his voice was steady for the first time since he had stepped onto this parade ground. Okay, he said. His fingers tightened around Nadia's hand. Okay, Colonel Ashby nodded. A small smile crossed his weathered face. Then let us complete this ceremony properly. He turned and walked back toward the stage. Nadia followed, pulling Elias gently along with her. The crowd parted before them, families stepping aside without being asked, creating a path to the stairs that led up to the platform, where the flags hung motionless against the morning sky. Elias climbed the stairs on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Each step carried him further from the anonymity he had hidden behind for 8 years. Each step brought him closer to something he had not felt since before Elena died. Hope. Nadia took her position at the center of the stage. Elias stood beside her, achingly aware of how out of place he must look. The worn flannel shirt, the scuffed boots, the road grime under his fingernails. Surrounded by officers in dress uniforms, by flags and bunting and all the pristine ceremony of military tradition, he looked like exactly what he was. A man who had lost his way and was only now beginning to find it again. Colonel Ashby picked up the box containing Nadia's captain bars. He opened it and held it out to Elias. The gold insignia gleamed in the morning light. 2 parallel bars, each one representing a level of responsibility and leadership that most people would never understand. Elias looked at them, and for a moment his vision blurred with tears he could not stop. His hand was shaking as he reached for the first bar. Command Sergeant Major Elias Vance, Colonel Ashby said, his voice carrying across the parade ground, it is my honor to have you present for your daughter's promotion to the rank of captain in the United States Army. Elias removed the first lieutenant bars from Nadia's collar. His fingers, steady enough to make impossible shots at impossible distances, trembled as they worked the fasteners. He had pinned medals on fellow operators. He had been pinned himself, more times than he could count. But nothing in his 31 years of service had prepared him for this moment. He attached the first captain bar to her right collar, then the left, each motion deliberate, each motion carrying the weight of everything he should have been there for and was not. When it was done, he stepped back, Nadia stood before him, a captain in the United States Army, her eyes bright with tears, her smile carrying a joy that 8 years of absence had not been able to destroy. "I am proud of you," Elias said. The words came out rough, scraped raw by emotion. "Your mother would be so proud of you." Nadia reached out and took his hand again. "I know," she said. "She told me. Every day, she told me how proud she was of both of us." Around them, the parade ground erupted. It started with Sergeant Keene, a single sharp salute, his hand snapping to his brow with the precision of a soldier who understood what he was honoring. Then another officer joined him. Then another. Then the families were standing, not saluting, but applauding, tears streaming down faces, children lifted on his shoulders to see the father and daughter on the stage. Colonel Ashby stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "please join me in congratulating Captain Nadia Vance, and in honoring her father, Command Sergeant Major Elias Vance, whose service to this nation spans 3 decades of operations that many of us will never know about, but all of us benefit from." The applause swelled, a wave of sound that washed over the stage and carried with it something Elias had not felt in years: acceptance. He stood beside his daughter, her hand in his, and for the first time since Elena's funeral, he did not feel the crushing need to run. The weight was still there. The guilt, the grief, the memory of every friend he had lost, every shot he had missed, every promise he had broken. But standing on that stage, with Nadia's hand in his and the applause of strangers washing over him, Elias understood that carrying weight was not the same as carrying it alone. And in the front row, standing apart from the celebrating families, Captain Marcus Reinhardt watched the scene unfold with an expression that had completed its transformation from contempt to something far more uncomfortable: the dawning realization of exactly how wrong he had been. The applause faded slowly, settling over the parade ground like the last notes of a song that no one wanted to end. Families returned to their seats. Officers resumed their positions. The ceremony had been disrupted in a way that no protocol could have anticipated, but no one seemed to mind. Something had happened on that stage that transcended the orderly progression of names and ranks and pinning ceremonies. Something real. Colonel Ashby returned to the podium to continue with the remaining promotions, but his voice carried a different quality now. Warmer, more personal, as if the moment with Elias and Nadia had reminded him why these ceremonies mattered in the first place. Nadia led Elias down from the stage, her hand still holding his, unwilling to let go even for a moment. They made their way to seats that had been hastily vacated by a family who insisted, through tearful smiles, that they wanted the father and daughter to sit together. Elias lowered himself into the chair. His legs were unsteady. His heart was pounding with an intensity he had not felt since his last combat deployment. Everything that had happened in the last 20 minutes felt like a fever dream, like something his exhausted mind had conjured during one of those long nights in the cab of his truck. But Nadia's hand in his was real. The weight of the captain bars he had just pinned to her collar was real. And the faces of the families around him, looking at him with something between curiosity and respect, were real. A woman in the row behind them leaned forward. She was perhaps 60, with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "My husband served in the Gulf," she said softly. "He never talked about what he did over there, but I recognized the look." She reached out and touched Elias's shoulder briefly. "Thank you for your service. And thank you for coming back to your daughter." Elias did not trust himself to speak. He nodded once, a sharp motion that conveyed more than words could have. The ceremony continued. 2 more officers received their promotions. Families went up to the stage, pinned ranks, embraced their loved ones. The rhythm of military tradition reasserted itself, smoothing over the extraordinary interruption that had occurred. But something had changed in the atmosphere of the parade ground, an electricity that had not been there before, a sense that the people gathered here had witnessed something they would tell stories about for years to come. When the last promotion was complete, Colonel Ashby returned to the microphone. He looked out over the assembled families, his eyes eventually finding Elias in the crowd. "Before we conclude today's ceremony," he said, "I would like to take a moment to recognize someone whose presence here today was unexpected but deeply meaningful." He paused, gathering himself. 23 years ago, I was a young lieutenant leading a platoon in a place I am still not permitted to name. We were ambushed, outnumbered, cut off from extraction. I watched good men die that night, and I was certain I would be joining them. The parade ground had gone silent again. Every eye was fixed on the colonel, and then a single operator appeared. Ashby continued. He came out of the darkness like something from a legend. I did not know his name. I did not know his unit. All I knew was that he moved through that compound like death itself. And when the sun rose, 32 men who should have died were still breathing. He looked directly at Elias. I asked him his name when it was over. He told me it did not matter. But I have spent 23 years trying to find out anyway. I have spent 23 years wanting to say 2 words that seemed completely inadequate for what he did. Ashby's voice cracked. "Thank you." The words hung in the air. Simple, insufficient, and yet carrying the weight of 32 lives saved, of families that existed because one man had walked into a killing ground and refused to let it claim any more souls. Elias sat motionless. Beside him, Nadia had tears streaming down her face. Around them, the families who had come to celebrate their own soldiers were now bearing witness to something larger. A debt repaid, a hero revealed, a moment of grace in a world that so often seemed devoid of it. Colonel Ashby was not finished. Command Sergeant Major Elias Vance, call sign Spectre, he said, served this nation for 31 years in capacities that most of us will never know about. His record includes 4 tours in Afghanistan, 3 in Iraq, and classified operations on 3 continents. He has been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, 3 Bronze Stars with Valor, and the Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. These were military families. They understood what those decorations meant. They understood the kind of service required to earn them. But more importantly, Ashby continued, he is a father. A father who drove 1,400 miles to watch his daughter become a captain. A father who has carried burdens that most of us cannot imagine. A father who, despite everything he has been through, found his way back to the person who matters most. He turned to face Elias directly. "Sergeant Major Vance, on behalf of every soldier whose life you saved, every family that exists because of your service, and every person on this parade ground today, I want to say what I should have said 23 years ago." Colonel Ashby raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Welcome home." The effect was instantaneous. Every officer on the stage followed suit, their hands snapping to their brows in perfect unison. Sergeant Keene, standing near the stairs, saluted so hard his arm trembled. Even the young enlisted soldiers providing support for the ceremony came to attention and rendered honors. And then, one by one, the veterans in the crowd stood. Men and women of different ages, different branches, different eras of service. They rose from their seats and saluted the trucker in the worn flannel shirt who had tried to watch his daughter's promotion from the back row. Elias sat frozen. His hand found a broken compass in his pocket, fingers closing around it like a lifeline. He thought of Hound, of the 90 seconds it had taken his best friend to die, of the last words spoken in that blood-soaked room in Afghanistan. Get home to them. That is an order. 22 years late, Elias thought. But I finally made it. He rose slowly from his seat. His body straightened into the posture that 31 years of service had drilled into his bones. And he returned the salute with a precision that belied his worn appearance and road-weary frame. When he lowered his hand, he was crying. Tears he had not shed since Elena's funeral. Tears he had not allowed himself to shed through 8 years of running and hiding and punishing himself for sins that existed only in his own broken heart. Nadia stood beside him. Her arms slipped through his, anchoring him, letting him know that whatever came next, he would not face it alone. And across the parade ground, standing apart from the saluting veterans, Captain Marcus Reinhardt remained at attention. His hand was at his brow. His face was pale. and his eyes, fixed on the man he had threatened and mocked and tried to have removed, were bright with the beginning of tears he could not explain and could not stop. The ceremony concluded with the playing of the army song, the notes drifting across the parade ground as families rose from their seats and began moving toward their newly promoted loved ones. Cameras flashed. Embraces were exchanged. The orderly rows of white chairs dissolved into clusters of joy and celebration. But around Elias and Nadia, a different kind of gathering was forming. Veterans approached first. Men and women who had served in different wars, different decades, different branches. They came with hands extended and words of respect spoken in the particular shorthand of those who had worn the uniform. Some simply shook his hand and nodded. Others spoke of their own service, their own losses, their own long roads home. A few said nothing at all, just stood before him with tears in their eyes, communicating something that transcended language. Then came the families, parents of the officers who had been promoted that day, wanting to thank the man whose presence had transformed a routine ceremony into something they would remember forever. They told him about their sons and daughters, about the sacrifices their families had made, about the pride they felt watching their children serve. Elias received them all with quiet grace. His hand found Nadia's between each greeting, anchoring himself to her presence, reminding himself that this was real, that he was here, that after 8 years of running, he had finally stopped. Sergeant Keene made his way through the crowd. He stopped in front of Elias and came to attention, his bearing reflecting the respect of one warrior for another. "Sergeant Major," he said, "I want to apologize. When I first saw you in the back row, I should have recognized what I was looking at. I should have done more to intervene sooner." Elias shook his head. "You did enough, Sergeant. You did more than enough." Keene hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a challenge coin. It bore the insignia of the 75th Ranger Regiment, worn smooth by years of handling. "My first sergeant gave me this the day I graduated RASP," he said. "He told me to pass it on someday to someone who embodied what it meant to be a Ranger." He held it out to Elias. "I have been waiting 12 years to find that person." Elias looked at the coin, the weight of what it represented, the tradition it carried. He shook his head again. "I cannot accept that," he said. "That belongs to you, to your service." Keene pressed it into his palm. "My service exists because of men like you, Sergeant Major. Men who went into the dark so the rest of us could serve in the light." He closed Elias's fingers around the coin. "Please, it would be an honor." Elias held the coin for a long moment. Then he nodded once, a gesture of acceptance that carried more weight than words. "Rangers lead the way," he said softly. Keene's face broke into a smile. "All the way, Sergeant Major." He stepped back, rendered one final salute, and disappeared into the crowd. Colonel Ashby approached next. He had removed his cap, and his silver hair caught the morning light as he extended his hand to Elias. "I meant what I said up there," Ashby told him. "I have thought about you every day for 23 years. Wondered who you were. Wondered if you made it home safe." He gripped Elias's hand firmly. "I used to hope that wherever you were, you had found some peace, some happiness." Elias met his eyes. "I have not found much of either, sir. Not until today." Ashby nodded slowly. "Then perhaps today is the beginning of something new." He released Elias's hand and reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a business card. "I run a reintegration program for Special Operations veterans. Non-VA, no bureaucracy. Just a place where men who have seen what we have seen can talk without being judged." He pressed the card into Elias's palm. "If you ever need someone to listen, my door is always open." Elias looked at the card. Simple white stock. A name, a phone number, an address in Virginia. "Thank you, sir," he said. His voice was rough with emotion. "I do not know if I am ready for something like that." Ashby smiled. "Nobody is ever ready, Sergeant Major. But the offer stands. Whenever you are." He clapped Elias on the shoulder and moved away, leaving father and daughter standing in a small clearing that had formed in the crowd around them. Nadia turned to face Elias. Her captain bars gleamed on her collar, catching the light every time she moved. She looked at him with eyes that held 8 years of questions, 8 years of grief, 8 years of hope that had refused to die no matter how many times it was disappointed. "What happens now?" she asked. Her voice was soft, almost afraid. Elias did not have an answer. He had not thought beyond this moment, had not allowed himself to imagine what might come after the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, and he was left standing in the wreckage of the walls he had built around himself. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have a truck in the parking lot, a route that takes me through 11 states, a life that does not have room for much besides the road and the rearview mirror." Nadia's jaw tightened. "That is not a life, Dad. That is hiding." The words stung because they were true. "I know," Elias said. "I have been hiding for 8 years. From you. From myself. From everything that hurt too much to face." He paused, struggling to find words for feelings he had buried so deep he had forgotten they existed. "But I do not know how to stop. I do not know how to be anything other than what I have become." Nadia reached out and took both of his hands in hers. Her grip was strong, certain, the grip of a woman who had built a career on finding solutions to impossible problems. "Then let me help you figure it out," she said. "Come home with me, Dad. Not forever if you're not ready. Just for now. Just for tonight. We can figure out the rest tomorrow." Elias looked at his daughter, at the captain bars he had pinned to her collar, at the determination in her eyes that reminded him so much of Elena that his heart ached. "Your mother would have been proud of you," he said. "Not just for the promotion. For everything. For the person you have become." Nadia's eyes glistened. "She would have been proud of you too, Dad. For being here. For not running away again." Elias thought of the truck in the parking lot. The open road stretching out in every direction. The anonymity of highway rest stops and loading docks, and the endless rhythm of miles passing beneath his wheels. Then he thought of Elena, of Hound, of the promise he had made and broken and been given one last chance to keep. "Okay," he said. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Okay, just for tonight." Nadia's face broke into a smile that transformed her features, that made her look for just a moment like the little girl who used to run to greet him when he came home from deployments. She pulled him into an embrace, her arms wrapping around him with a fierceness that said she was never going to let him disappear again. And Elias held his daughter in the middle of a parade ground, surrounded by families celebrating their own reunions, and allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, it was not too late to come home. The crowd had begun to thin when Captain Marcus Reinhardt finally approached. He moved through the remaining families with none of the theatrical confidence he had displayed earlier that morning. His shoulders were drawn in. His jaw was tight. His eyes, when they finally met Elias's, held something that looked like physical pain. Nadia saw him coming first. Her hand tightened on her father's arm, and her expression hardened into the professional mask of an intelligence officer assessing a potential threat. "Captain," she said. Her voice carried no warmth. Reinhardt stopped a few feet away. He stood at attention, though no one had ordered him to. His hands hung at his sides, and for a long moment he said nothing. Just stood there, struggling with something that seemed to be tearing him apart from the inside. "Sergeant Major Vance," he finally said. His voice was hoarse, stripped of the contempt and authority that had characterized every word he had spoken earlier. "I owe you an apology." Elias studied the younger man, the flush of shame on his cheeks, the way his eyes kept dropping to the ground before forcing themselves back up, the tremor in his hands that he was trying unsuccessfully to hide. He had seen men break before, in combat, under interrogation, in the quiet hours after missions that had cost them pieces of themselves they would never get back. But he had rarely seen a man break from the simple realization that he had been wrong. "I treated you with contempt," Reinhardt continued. "I assumed the worst based on your appearance. I threatened you, mocked you, tried to have you removed from your own daughter's promotion ceremony." He swallowed hard. "I was wrong. Completely and inexcusably wrong." Nadia's expression did not soften. "You spent an hour humiliating a man who has given more to this country than you will ever understand," she said. "An apology does not erase that." Reinhardt flinched. "No," he said, "it is not. Nothing I say can erase what I did. But I need him to know that I understand now, that I will carry the shame of this mourning for the rest of my career. Elias held up a hand, silencing whatever Nadia was about to say next. He looked at Reinhardt for a long moment, seeing past the pressed uniform and the protocol officer's authority to the man beneath. A man who had built his identity on maintaining order, on enforcing standards, on ensuring that everything under his watch proceeded according to plan. A man who had never learned that sometimes the most important things in life did not fit neatly into categories and protocols. "How old are you, Captain?" Elias asked. Reinhardt blinked, caught off guard by the question. 34, Sergeant Major. Elias nodded slowly. "When I was 34, I was on my third deployment. I had already lost friends, already made mistakes that cost lives, already learned that the world does not sort itself into neat categories of who belongs and who does not." He paused, letting the words settle. "You made a mistake today, a bad one, but the measure of a man is not the mistakes he makes. It is what he does after." Reinhardt's jaw tightened. "What can I possibly do after something like this?" "Learn," Elias said simply. "Remember this feeling. Remember what it felt like to be absolutely certain you were right and then discover you were absolutely wrong." He gestured toward the parade ground, toward the families still gathered in small clusters. "Every person you meet is carrying something you cannot see. Burdens, histories, wounds that do not show on the surface. The next time you look at someone and think you know who they're based on how they look, remember this morning. Remember me." Reinhardt was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I will, Sergeant Major. I swear to you I will." He came to attention and rendered a salute that held none of the perfunctory crispness of military routine. It was a salute of genuine respect, offered by a man who had learned something painful about himself and was determined to be better for it. Elias returned the salute. Then he extended his hand. Reinhardt stared at it for a moment, as if he could not believe what he was seeing. Then he reached out and gripped it firmly. "Thank you," he said. His voice cracked on the words. "Thank you for not being the man I assumed you were." Elias almost smiled. "Thank you for being willing to admit you were wrong. That takes more courage than you might think." Reinhardt released his hand, nodded once to Nadia, and turned away. He walked across the parade ground with the slow, heavy steps of a man carrying a new weight. But there was something in his bearing that had not been there before. A humility, an awareness, the beginning of wisdom that could only come from being completely and utterly wrong. Nadia watched him go. Her expression had softened slightly, though her voice still carried an edge when she spoke. "You forgave him too easily." Elias shook his head. "I did not forgive him. Forgiveness takes time, but I gave him a chance to earn it." He turned to look at his daughter. "The same chance you gave me." Nadia's eyes glistened. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, a new voice cut across the parade ground. "Captain Vance." They turned to see Colonel Ashby approaching, accompanied by a woman in civilian clothes. She was perhaps 55, with steel-gray hair cut short and eyes that carried the particular sharpness of someone who had spent decades evaluating people and situations. "Colonel," Nadia said, straightening slightly. Ashby gestured to the woman beside him. "Captain, Sergeant Major, I would like you to meet Dr. Margaret Chun. She runs a counseling program for veterans and their families at the VA Medical Center in Alexandria. When she heard about what happened here today, she asked if she could meet you." Dr. Chun extended her hand to Elias. Her grip was firm, professional, but her eyes held genuine warmth. "Sergeant Major Vance," she said, "I specialize in helping veterans reconnect with families they have been separated from." She glanced at Nadia, then back to Elias. "What you did today, coming here after 8 years, that took extraordinary courage. But the hard work is just beginning. Reconnection is a process, not an event. It takes time, support, professional guidance." Elias tensed. He had spent 8 years avoiding anything that resembled professional help. Counselors, therapists, VA programs that promised healing and delivered paperwork. Dr. Chin seemed to read his hesitation. "I'm not here to pressure you," she said. "I'm just here to let you know that resources exist. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, there are people who can help." She produced a card from her pocket and handed it to Nadia. "My number. For both of you." No pressure. No timeline. Just an open door. Nadia took the card. Thank you, doctor. We'll keep it in mind. Dr. Chin nodded. She looked at Elias one more time, and something in her expression suggested she understood more than she was saying. Welcome home, Sergeant Major, she said softly. However long the road was, you made it. She turned and walked away, leaving Elias standing with his daughter on a parade ground that had nearly emptied. The morning sun had climbed higher, burning away the last of the haze. The flags above the stage stirred slightly in a breeze that had not been there before. And somewhere in the distance, a bugle was playing a melody that Elias recognized from 100 ceremonies, 100 farewells, 100 moments when the army said goodbye to its own. But today was not a farewell. Today was a beginning. Nadia slipped her arm through his. Come on, Dad, she said. Let us go home. Elias looked at his daughter, at the captain bars on her collar, at the strength in her eyes that had carried her through 8 years of his absence and emerged unbroken. Okay, he said. Let's go home. 3 months later, Elias stood at Elena's grave for the first time since her funeral. The cemetery was quiet in the early morning light. Dew clung to the grass around the headstone, catching the sun and scattering it into tiny prisms of color. The inscription was simple. Elena Maria Vance, beloved wife and mother. The dates that bracketed a life that had ended too soon. Nadia stood beside him, her hand resting on his arm. She had driven him here, had waited patiently while he worked up the courage to walk through the gates, had said nothing when he stopped 3 times on the path because his legs refused to carry him forward. She understood. She had always understood, even when understanding meant accepting that her father was too broken to stay. Elias lowered himself to one knee. The grass was cool and damp through his jeans. New jeans, clean boots, a flannel shirt that did not smell of diesel and distance. Small changes that marked larger ones happening beneath the surface. Hey, sweetheart, he said softly. His voice caught on the words. I am sorry it took me so long to come back. The headstone did not answer, but the wind stirred the leaves of a nearby oak, and somewhere in the branches a bird began to sing, and Elias chose to believe that Elena was listening. I ran away, he continued. After you died, I could not face Nadia, could not look at her without seeing you, could not stay in a house that still smelled like your perfume and still had your toothbrush in the holder. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I told myself I was protecting her, told myself she was better off without a father who woke up screaming from nightmares. But I was lying. I was just too broken to stay. Nadia's hand tightened on his arm. She found me anyway, Elias said. He looked up at his daughter, at the captain bars still gleaming on the collar of her uniform. She never stopped looking, never stopped hoping. She is stronger than both of us, Elena. Stronger than I ever gave her credit for. He reached into his pocket and withdrew the broken compass. The glass was still cracked. The needle was still frozen. But now, instead of a reminder of failure, it had become something else. A connection to the friend who had given his life believing that Elias was worth saving. Hound told me to get home to you, Elias said. The day he died, those were his last words. Get home to them. That is an order. He turned the compass over in his hands. It took me 22 years, brother, but I finally made it. He placed the compass gently at the base of Elena's headstone. It rested there against the granite, catching the morning light, finally at rest after decades of being carried through darkness. I'm going to leave this here, Elias said. With both of you. He touched the headstone, his fingers tracing the letters of Elena's name. I do not need it anymore to remember. I carry you both with me every day. In here, he pressed his hand against his chest, where it matters. He rose slowly to his feet. His knees ached from the position, a reminder that he was 62 years old and had spent too many years sleeping in the cab of a truck. But there was a lightness in his chest that had not been there before. A sense of weight lifted, of debts finally paid. Nadia stepped forward and placed a small bouquet of wildflowers beside the compass. Mom would have loved today, she said. She always loved mornings like this, when the light was soft and the world was quiet. Elias nodded. She used to wake me up early just to watch the sunrise. He smiled at the memory. I complained every time. Told her I needed sleep. She would just laugh and drag me out of bed anyway. Nadia laughed softly. She did the same thing to me. Every weekend when I was a kid. I hated it back then. Now I would give anything to have her drag me out of bed one more time. They stood together in silence for a long moment, father and daughter, united in grief and memory and the slow work of healing. 3 months had passed since the promotion ceremony. 3 months of small steps and setbacks and gradual progress. Elias had sold his truck, had moved into a small apartment near Nadia's house, had started attending Colonel Ashby's reintegration program, sitting in circles with other operators who carried similar weights, learning that he was not alone in his burdens. It was not easy. Some days the darkness still called to him. Some nights he still woke up reaching for a rifle that was not there, listening for threats that existed only in memory. Some mornings he still thought about climbing into a truck and disappearing down an endless highway. But he did not run. Not anymore. When the darkness came, he called Nadia. When the nightmares woke him, he wrote in the journal Dr. Chun had given him. When the urge to flee became overwhelming, he looked at the photograph on his nightstand. Elena and Nadia smiling at him from across the years, reminding him of what he had almost lost and what he had been given back. If you are watching this story from wherever you are in the world, know that every person you pass on the street is carrying something you cannot see. A burden, a history, a wound that does not show on the surface. The old man in the worn flannel shirt might be a legend whose name is whispered with reverence in places you will never see. The veteran asking for change might have medals in a box somewhere that would make your jaw drop. We would love to know where you're watching from today, and if stories about hidden heroes speak to you, please consider subscribing to our channel. Now, let us finish this story together. Nadia drove them from the cemetery to a small diner on the outskirts of town. It had become their Sunday tradition. Breakfast together, conversation about nothing important, the slow rebuilding of a relationship that had been broken for 8 years. They slid into a booth by the window. A waitress brought coffee without being asked. She knew them now, knew their orders, knew that the older man always sat facing the door and the younger woman always made him laugh at least once before the food arrived. "Dad," Nadia said, wrapping her hand around her mug. "I have been thinking." Elias raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About Uncle Ray's sister." "Hound's sister?" "She lives in North Carolina now. She has 3 kids." She paused, watching his face carefully. "She has been asking about you, wondering if you might want to visit." Elias went still. He had not seen Margaret Coulter since Hound's funeral, had not been able to face her, knowing that her brother had died because of a shot he missed. The guilt had been too heavy, the shame too deep. "I do not know if I can," he said. "After everything, I do not know if she would want to see me." Nadia reached across the table and took his hand. "She called me Dad. She found my number through the Army directory. She said she has been wanting to see you for 22 years. She said Hound wrote her letters about you, about how you were the best sniper he ever worked with, about how he trusted you with his life." Elias's throat tightened. He told her that. He told her everything, Nadia said. And she does not blame you. She never blamed you. She just wanted to meet the man her brother loved like a brother. The diner blurred as tears filled Elias's eyes. He had spent 22 years carrying the weight of Hound's death. 22 years believing that Margaret must hate him. 22 years running from a forgiveness that had been waiting for him all along. "Maybe," he said. His voice was barely a whisper. "Maybe I could try." Nadia smiled. "That is all anyone can do, Dad. Try." They finished their breakfast as the morning sun climbed higher and the diner filled with other families starting their Sundays. When a check came, Elias reached for it automatically. Nadia let him. It was another small ritual, another thread in the fabric they were weaving together, day by day, meal by meal, conversation by conversation. Outside, the parking lot was warm with late summer heat. Nadia unlocked her car, but Elias paused before climbing in. He looked up at the sky, at the endless blue stretching out in every direction, at the clouds drifting slowly toward horizons he could no longer see. For 8 years, that sky had been a reminder of all the miles he still needed to run, all the distance he needed to put between himself and everything that hurt. Now was something else. A canopy over a world that had room for him again. A ceiling above a life that was slowly, painfully, beautifully being rebuilt. "Thank you," he said softly. The words were not directed at Nadia, though she heard them. They were directed at Elena, at Hound, at every person who had believed in him when he could not believe in himself. "For not giving up on me." Nadia came around the car and stood beside him. She did not say anything. She just slipped her hand into his and stood there, father and daughter, looking up at the same sky. And for the first time in 8 years, Elias Vance did not want to run. He was already home.